Can we expect as many rate hikes as announced? Probably not. If we look at what has happened in markets with the latest announcements from the Federal Reserve and other central banks, and particularly after the extremely dovish but misinterpreted messages from Ms. Lagarde at the ECB, what we can see is that there's too much risk in the economy, there's too much risk accumulated in markets, and even the most dovish message, even an extremely vague message about rate hikes, rocks the sovereign debt market. And we see that risk premia are rising in the Eurozone, that suddenly there's an abrupt change in the exchange rate of the euro dollar, etc. What this tells us is that markets have been extremely complacent throughout the years of expansionary monetary policy. And even with messages from the Fed and the ECB that continue to be extremely accommodative, let's remember that what the ECB and the Fed have announced leaves them significantly behind the curve and with negative real rates, even with their own assumptions of inflation. Let's remember as well that the ECB will continue to purchase an extraordinary amount of sovereign bonds, and that the Fed will continue purchasing mortgage-backed securities, which no one can understand with the mortgage and a house market in absolute boom environment. So the central banks will continue to be extremely dovish. But on top of that, governments and markets are unwilling to accept an increase in borrowing costs. The reality of the economy is that the economy is slowing down, and it's slowing down significantly. The PMIs and the figures that we have seen since the recovery reached a peak, which was around June, show a slowdown of both the North American and the European economies, for sure. But what's important as well to understand is that inflationary pressures remain significant. So central banks need to choose between keeping the bond bubble and the bubble of everything alive and combating inflation. What they have chosen is to try to provide a message that sort of leaves them in the middle of both. A message of normalization that doesn't normalize. A message of rate hikes that leave them still significantly behind the curve. And a message of purchase slowdown that continues to be massively above what would be called real normalization. However, it seems that both markets, governments, and the economy are not reacting the way that central banks would like them to, which is like if it's the path of normalization and everything continues smoothly up. Therefore, what is very likely is that both the Fed and the European Central Bank may slow down and put the brakes on their path of normalization in an environment in which the slowdown of the economy becomes more significant, in which inflationary pressures are still high, but they will prefer to keep the bond bubble alive and deficit spending governments significantly issuing debt way lower yields, at way lower yields than what the reality of solvency and the reality of the economy would suggest. So central banks will prefer to support governments in issuing debt at extremely low cost despite inflationary pressures, rather than combating an inflation that they can sort of disguise under a number of different factors. Call it geopolitical risks, you name it, it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, inflation is always a monetary phenomenon, and what we're seeing is more money going into assets that are relatively scarce, into goods and services that are relatively scarce. But The point is, it is very difficult for central banks to truly normalize because monetary policy has incentivized debt and incentivized bubbles so aggressively that even the most modest reaction in normalization from central bank leads to a very significant deterioration of the credit market, of the borrowing costs and service of debt of governments, and the improvement of the economy. The economy is so indebted and so and risks that have been accumulated are so huge that for central banks, even the mildest normalization leads to an abrupt problem in the economy. That's what happens when you fuel the bubble of everything. You fuel the bubble of everything and the bubble bursts. Thank you very much.
Thank you for watching this video. Please subscribe to my channel, like my videos, leave your comments below, and keep defending freedom. Thank you very much.